Greetings, everybody. It's Jim. You know, when I seen this map for the first time, my hands started ringing in anticipation for its arrival because I definitely love space combat games, and you know it. And this being a old hex and counter space combat game, I had to wonder to myself, how are they going to handle movement? You know, is it going to be faster than light? Is there going to be facing? I mean, what's their take? Everybody's got to have a little bit different take because, I mean, it's one thing to have combat and everything, and I knew it was an SPI game, so it's going to have that basic CRT, so I didn't expect too many changes and big deals there. But it does definitely come into the maneuver aspect of it. Now, the big thing, though, that I found out about this game that I didn't know by the time I got it, this is pretty big of a map, actually. But it's even bigger than it looks. As a matter of fact, it's about 50 to 60 times bigger than it looks. Why? Because it's three-dimensional. Good golly, Miss Molly, today I am going to be going over with you my review of Starforce from SPI. Alright, so when I got the game, I kind of, started to think it was going to be more like Triplanetary or something similar, a nice little movement system, but actually, and the fact that they also pressed it as a hard science fiction idea, it actually felt more like Trailblazer from the micro game from Metagaming, which is just fine. It's still kind of hard science fiction, absolutely. The only difference is that this is more of a press your luck kind of thing. The ships actually move by, it's kind of like Dune, the movie Dune or the book Dune from Frank Herbert, where you're not really moving through space, you are just popping in and out of it. You're going from one spot to the next, which is kind of good and was kind of a good idea because, again, this is a three-dimensional map. Okay, so it would be hard to say if these guys are up here and these guys are down here, where do they meet in the middle? And that can get a little bit weird and stuff. And they just dispersed with that whole thing, saying, no, you'll just pass each other if you actually plot courses. And that is what you do in this, by the way. You do plot your courses. You write down where you're from and then where you're going to. Most of the ships in this game, at first, when I seen the number of counters and I read that, I'm like, oh my gosh, how this is going to be, and there's a list of like 26 counters that you could have, ships. I'm like, that's going to be a lot of work, but most of the scenarios actually only have like maybe 8 ships max aside. Okay, but and it's not really hard to do. It's actually quite easy to do this three-dimensional movement. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But basically, when you're moving, you can move 5 safely, and otherwise you disperse, right? But the disbursement is different than in Trailblazer. In Trailblazer, you miss by a little bit, you go off by a few hexes, and you can recover. Or, if you go off too far, you can just go off the universe and never come back. Which can happen here in Starforce. However, in Starforce, what I thought, and this was my strategy, I was like, okay, well, I'll just take my stack knowing I'm going to disperse and try to get anywhere in one turn, and then I'll just, they'll probably disperse pretty far, but at the same time, I'll have enough time to regroup at the target, and that was kind of the idea. However, what they actually do is to deter that is called mirroring. So if I want to go 7 hexes this way and I screw it up, I'm actually going 7 hexes in the opposite direction. So I'm way off course, okay? And now it's just going to be tougher to get there, and you're going to have to even risk it more if you really need that ship to go over there. Because again, this is your typical war game. You do need forces to destroy the enemy, so you have to, a multiple of 3 or 4 for every one that's at the target. Now, there are bonuses to increase your movement rather than just taking a press your luck attitude. If you're going to a hex that already has a Starforce there that's friendly to you, you can move an extra 5 hexes. So in other words, and it's going to that hex, not having another Starforce to help push you, it's actually being at the destination that you're going to help pull you into that hex. So you end up wanting this chain reaction kind of idea going on. And a starbase even can pull you even further. And you can really go across the world. Starbase to starbase can give you 20 hexes. Okay, so there's definitely some more maneuvering strategy that has to go on here. So this is pretty much their version of the logistics of the game. As you know, a lot of games out there, the most basic ones are just, here's my stack of forces, I'm attacking in here, and that's all you have to do. The more interesting ones do have some kind of way to make it tougher to get to your target. For instance, Columbia Games, the block system. You can't just take a stack and go from hex to hex. There's only so many forces that can go through a certain hex side. Like there's a 3 limit here, there's a 2 limit here because it's in a forest, maybe 1 here, and so it takes it a lot longer and to make sure that you get an extra turn or two to make sure you get your forces there at the right time and attack all at once. And do it quickly enough where the other guy can't bring his forces in. So that's kind of like what's going on here. Because in this game, you plot movement, okay? You're not moving like, all my forces and you get to go. We're doing it simultaneous. You write it down. And it's really not difficult. And we're going to be going over how to move in 3-dimensional space right now. Alright, so here we have Sol and Alpha Centauri, and as most of us wargamers already know, the hexes are designated by the X and Y, so the first 2 numbers are the X, the last 2 numbers are the Y coordinates. So 2020 is where Sol is at, the X is 20 hexes from the left and 20 from the top. Okay, so that's what it is, and Alpha Centauri is on hex 1821, so 18 from the left, 21 from the top. That's how you find it. The number next to them is the Zulu, otherwise the Z coordinate. So 2020 for Sol has 0 because it is the center of the whole game. So it's right smack dab in the middle of dang well everything. And Alpha Centauri is -4. So that means here's the plane of existence. If Sol is up here, 4 levels down is where Alpha Centauri is. And of course you have some that are +16, so they're 16 higher. Now, when you're going from one spot to another, what you do is you calculate the true distance, and it's actually quite easy. So the main question I had when playing the sample game was, okay, this works, and I see it, and it's really not difficult, but is there any benefit from doing the whole 3D thing? I mean, you could play this with 2D, just like Star Blazer and stuff, and do the whole press your luck thing. That's where the strategy comes in. Where does it come in with the 3-dimensionals? I don't know. And it almost seems like it's the same thing with extra steps. You may have heard that before. So is it worth the payoff? At first, I was also thinking that maybe it's the idea of making it more complicated so people who were not as mathy would have a harder time. But actually, that actually gives them even more of an advantage than their less mathy opponent. The reason I was thinking this is because that's, if you see my video, the psychology of dice, it talks about that, how dice have changed from just being straight up numbers in a lot of these combat games to specialized dice with multiple symbols on them and different amounts of those symbols on the die, so you can't figure out an exact number and percentage of success. Alright, so combat in Starforce, at least in the basic game, is actually quite straightforward. It's not as straightforward as your typical, you have strength points, there's the defense strength points, compare, CRT chart, roll, resolve, boom. It's a little bit different than that. And it's actually true to the nature of the game, since it's got a lot of feints and hidden movement and such like that. And the idea is both sides with their ships have a number of strength points per ship, and then both sides say, I'm going to put this many points into attack, this many points as defense. Okay, so it's going to be simultaneous combat there. And then they take that differential, whether, if I say I put 5 points in attack and you only put 3 in defense, I'm getting a +2 differential. I check out on the chart, boom, I roll, and that's how many star forces you lose if, whatever I roll, and vice versa. It happens in the reverse, again, simultaneously. So that's pretty interesting. Now, the only way that they also differentiated a little bit to give the defense an advantage is on the first turn, each Star Force, the attacker, actually doesn't have one, they lose one attack point, which they'll get back the next turn. So that gives the defense a little bit of advantage, so now the attacker has to bring even more ships into any combat. All right, let's take a moment now to talk about the advanced game. Now, they should call it the advanced combat system because really the movement stays the exact same way it was. Basically, the idea was let's teach them the movement first, do a very simplistic combat. Now we'll do the same thing if they want to go further and have the combat amplified a bit in three-dimensional space. And that's what they do here. Basically, what happens is any combat that takes place, now you take all the ships off that hex and you put them on the tactical display. You mark it with another marker saying TAC dis. That just says that's the hex where all these ships were. And what ends up happening is all the ships that are on defense are in the middle of the hex, or probably around, I think, 2 or 3 hex radius around the middle, and then everybody else that's attacking is on the outer edge, anywhere on the outer edge of the tactical display. And then they start maneuvering just as they would in the on the strategic map. And the thing is, now they're also trying to allocate where they're going to cast their attacks at. And it is a little just like the rock, paper, scissors from the basic game, right? You're saying, okay, I got so many points, I'm putting this many points into attack, this many in defense. But now you also have to plot where you're firing. Okay, so the thing is, in a regular game, you know, you would have like a two-dimensional game, you would have arcs, and of course, if you're maneuvering and if the ship is not in that arc, you don't get to shoot at it. This is even more so, where now you also not just cast in one direction, you also have to say whether you're casting, like how high you're casting it or how low you're casting it, and it's just another chance for you to overshoot your target. And also, when you're doing an anti-cast, it's like defense points, basically. They got a lot of terms in this game, which is also confusing. I mean, they're making terms up for every little thing than just saying fire arcs or something that's familiar. They just want to say cast, anti-cast, instead of attack and defense. It's a little bit much. You know, it's like they're trying to make their own little world here. And I want to acknowledge it because I know they're trying to be different, but at the same time, it's just too fiddly. But then again, that's what this game is, quite honestly, because just by reading this, I did not play it. I'm like, I already found out how fiddly the movement system was. Now you're going to tell me that we're going to do the same thing with attacking too? I mean, I know this game was one of the earliest attempts at 3D combat, right? But it definitely is an example of what can go wrong with it, because this is way too much work for any amount of payoff. I'm just not seeing it. Maybe if it was computer generated, helped in some way, like nowadays, it might be something good. I don't know. There's just so many games out there that tried it with even simpler systems to work, and it didn't work. You know, and it's like even Silent Death, one of the best spaceship combat games I've ever played, couldn't really do 3D, and it was a simple system. And here we are trying to get all, you know, Apollo 13 about the whole thing, you know, bringing out your slide rules and figuring everything. It's just way too much. So kudos to Redmond Simonson for having the guts to try to make the very first incarnations of three-dimensional space and be true to hard science fiction. Unfortunately, the verdict is this is practically unplayable. Now, I say practically because the way to do it, though, is to actually get away from the ambition of 3D and just use it as a two-dimensional game. Then maybe the whole thing would actually work. Okay, I can see the plotting work, and I like the movement system as far as the press your luck aspect goes. So keep that, just get the three-dimensional aspect out of the way. And then when you're done with that, you could actually do the tactical display. Again, do plotting like before, you know, 3D movement. And instead of doing a big casting thing and stuff like that, and because all the range of all the weapons is 5 hexes, just say, okay, from my ship, I think he's going to be in the upper right-hand arc. You know, because there's 6 arcs on a ship, right? Well, there's 6 arcs on hex sides that you could shoot from technically. If you know space games, you know what I'm talking about. And just say, I think he's going to be in that area. And that would be good enough. You would miss plenty. You know, you would have to still do a lot of guesswork and fan out your ships to try to, you know, that's why they're talking about casting a web. So I do think you would still get that. It's just that now you don't have to worry about the three-dimensional stuff. And I seem to be doing like this. Am I going to start doing Hadoukens all of a sudden by the end of this video? I'm not sure. But anyway, guys, that's my video for Starforce. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.